CBS News has learned Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth shared sensitive details about impending U.S. airstrikes in Yemen on a private text thread using his personal phone. The Signal group chat included his wife, brother, and personal attorney. Today at a White House Easter event, the very mention of a Signal chat set Hegseth off.
This is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations.
The messages included flight schedules for fighter jets tasked with striking Houthi targets. The same information Hegseth shared in a separate Signal chat that mistakenly included a journalist and has since prompted a Pentagon investigation.
What a big surprise that a few leakers get fired and suddenly a bunch of hit pieces come out.
Hegseth was referring to 3 of his top advisors who were fired Friday amid an investigation into Defense Department leaks, though the staffers claim they were never informed of the findings. In an op-ed, former spokesman John Elliott, who resigned last week, said the terminations reflect a month of total chaos at the Pentagon, adding the building is in disarray under Hegseth's leadership. And late today, Hegseth's chief of staff was reassigned. Still, Trump is standing by him.
Just the same old stuff from the media. That's an old one. Try finding something new.
White House officials insist the Pentagon boss is not going anywhere. Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska, a retired Air Force general, is the first Republican lawmaker to publicly speak out against Hegseth, telling CBS News he would not tolerate his conduct on Signal.
CBS News Pentagon reporter Eleanor Watson joining us now. Eleanor, what has been the reaction to Secretary Hegseth's comments at the Pentagon, where you are?
Well, yeah, both Secretary of Defense Hegseth and the president are blaming the media and former employees, but we still have not heard from Defense Secretary Hegseth any acknowledgement that sharing such sensitive details over Signal may not be the best way to disseminate that information. Now, this second chat that you've talked about is similar to the first one in that it has to do with strikes on March 15th with sensitive details about the timing and the types of weapons and the types of targets. But that first chat mistakenly included a journalist, and the second chat was started by Hegseth, who intentionally added his inner circle, including his brother, his personal attorney, and his wife, who is a former Fox News producer, not an employee of the Defense Department, and to our knowledge does not have a need to know about these strikes before they happen. Now, his brother and his personal attorney do have positions at the Pentagon, but it's unclear, again, why they would need to know about such sensitive details. The Pentagon has come back, said that there was no classified information shared in any Signal chat, but it's worth noting that the Defense Department Inspector General already, because of the first Signal chat, is evaluating Hegseth's use of Signal and whether or not he complied with Defense Department policies on classified information.
And at the Easter event earlier today, we heard President Trump just say he kind of brushed it off, blamed the media for all of this. But is there any indication of next steps for the White House?
The White House, you heard from President Trump himself, who is frustrated, tired of this story, but is blaming the media, is saying he is behind Defense Secretary Hegseth. Before we heard from the president, we heard from the White House press secretary, who said that the Pentagon is trying to undermine what Defense Secretary is doing because he's trying to make so many changes. Now, it's worth noting that some of the former disgruntled employees that Hegseth is apparently referring to were brought into the Pentagon by him, who have known him for a long time. It's not as if these are former employees who were resisting change. They weren't at the Pentagon before he got here.
It's all just the same old stuff from the media. That's an old one. Try finding something new.
James Laporta joins me now, and Barbara Starr joins me. Barbara is a longtime Pentagon correspondent, currently a senior fellow with the University of California's Annenberg Center on Communication Leadership. James, of course, national security coordinating producer for CBS News. James, what do we know about this? And just to piggyback off what the president said, it is new, actually,
right? The
second story, and it's very new, just to remind the audience, for any defense secretary to share any information of this sensitivity on Signal, an unsecured commercial app. So it is new.
Right. So the first time around with the Atlantic story was you had the principals involved that you would typically see in airstrikes involving the Houthis.
Secretary of State, National Security Advisor,
That's
CIA,
right.
Director of National Intelligence.
And their subordinates. And those are typically, so other than, Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, those are typically people you would see involved in those kind of airstrikes.
Those would be people read in on this.
Correct. Not typically on Signal,
no,
but they would be involved. This Signal chat is different. We have individuals who are not Defense Department employees. Pete Hegseth's wife, who's a former Fox News producer. To our knowledge, she has no security clearance and does not work at the Department of Defense. Pete Hegseth's brother and his attorney, they are Department of Defense employees, but arguably, you have to question why would they be involved in conversations like that. But again, this is all happening over Signal. These conversations shouldn't be happening. If you talk to military professionals, people in the IC, these are conversations that are more suited for the classified side of the house, what we call the high side or JWICs. You would have these conversations over top secret
and highly secure communications,
what we call SCIFs.
Right.
You would not be doing this over Signal.
And briefly, for the audience's benefit, what did he talk to or share about?
He shared
Signal.
He shared similar information about these FA-18s. Hornets are going to be involved in the strike at this time and place. Similar information that was shared that we saw, come out from the Atlantic story.
And to your experience and your previous reporting, had someone of lesser rank in the intelligence community or the military done this, what would have happened?
Oh, they'd have the book thrown at them. They'd be court-martialed. They'd be administratively separated. They would, regardless if the information is classified or not, there's no dispute amongst people that I've talked to that it's a violation of operational security and it's a violation of the cybersecurity policies. You're just simply not allowed to use Signal for these type of communications. And if it was a private, if it was a sergeant, if it was a high-ranking field grade officer, they'd be in trouble.
Barbara, there's also something else that's been going on at the Pentagon for the last couple of weeks. And John Elliott, who used to be an employee at the Pentagon, a high-ranking person brought there by Pete Hegseth, has since been separated, wrote a scathing op-ed in Politico saying that there is a sort of meltdown going on at the senior ranks of the Pentagon, and it's disserving the president.
It's a lot of drama. It's a lot of political drama. We see this in Washington, but let me make 2 points. Not to this scale. We have something like 5 senior aides that Hegseth brought in himself, now out the door. So that says something perhaps about his judgment about who he wanted to hire. But I think the deeper issue, even beyond the Washington political drama, is why does it matter? Why should the average American actually care about all this? And it is because it threatens national security. Hypothetical, but what if the Chinese got a hold and were able to crack into Hegseth's own personal phone, which he used in this case, and what if they were able to crack into Signal and download and look at his messages? That's why it matters. It's a lack of judgment. It's a Secretary of Defense who should know better. He served in the U.S. military. And there doesn't seem to be an immediate interest by President Trump to replace him. And I emphasize immediate. I circle back now to Washington drama. We've all been through these scandals. I think it's a fair bet that Hegseth could face the possibility, let me caveat, of potentially not serving out a full term.
And you spent years at the Pentagon. I was there in the lead up to and the 6 months after the Iraq War. One of the things I picked up there is this continuity of leadership, continuity of communication, and trust and reliability in the senior ranks. It seems to me that, at minimum, is a bit up for grabs right now under this current leadership.
Trust and reliability in the senior ranks, absolutely. Trust by Congress, trust by America's allies, trust by other defense ministers around the world that he needs to deal with, that he may want to have conversations with. Are they now going to be worried, as perhaps they should be, that their confidential conversations with Pete Hegseth are going to wind up in a Signal chat on his own personal phone, possibly for the Chinese or any hacker to get into? These are the real questions. I think the fundamental question for the White House, does Pete Hegseth tonight still have credibility on the international stage, and does he have credibility with Congress, especially with the Republicans. Yes, with most of them, many of them, but you're beginning to see some cracks in that credibility. And that's where, cliche, the rubber's going to hit the road.
This group right here, full of hoaxsters that peddle anonymous sources from leakers with axes to grind.
All right, O'Keefe is following all of this from the White House and joins us now. Ed, that comment jumped out at me because of the stark difference between the setting, his children around him, and his tone and his messaging. This chat that's being brought up was shared with Hegseth's wife and brother. What details can you share, and what did you make of Hegseth's defense yesterday?
Well, first of all, we should point out he approached the White House press pool upon his arrival at the egg roll. The pool didn't seek him out. And the pool, of course, is that group of reporters that is allowed into public White House events for the sake of space. There's a camera, there's radio, there's newspaper reporters. He approached them with his children in tow to make his latest argument in favor of him keeping his job and claiming that he did nothing wrong. Remember, he did that while he was overseas during the last time this was an issue. In this case, it appears he shared operational details to some extent regarding where and when fighter jets would be taking off, similar to the details that he shared with top cabinet secretaries and an Atlantic magazine editor-in-chief in mid-March about those strikes on Houthi rebels that took place around that time. The Pentagon defending him as well, suggesting that there were no classified details or information shared in the chat, and essentially saying that the secretary did nothing wrong. But it's another example of him, in essence, sharing information that others in the current and in previous administrations have said would otherwise be characterized as classified information that should not be shared over commercially available apps in any way in the lead up to the completion of a sensitive military operation.
I know that when it comes to the president's inner circle, he stands behind them until he doesn't. As of 7:40 this morning, Trump is behind Hegseth?
You've been through this before, Errol. Yes, as of this hour, he is still standing by him. In fact, the defense secretary is set to appear on one of the president's favorite news networks in the next hour to explain and defend himself yet again. But the president, in essence, telling reporters yesterday that he is standing by the secretary because of the leaks from what he called disgruntled employees, and suggesting that when you try to shake up an organization like the Pentagon, there are going to be people upset with you, and that's clearly the case with Hegseth. We should also point out the president claimed that everybody's happy with Hegseth and his performance so far. That is not true. There is at least one Republican congressman speaking out against him, Don Bacon of Nebraska, who's a former Air Force officer, suggesting, I would never tell the White House what to do, but I wouldn't tolerate it when it comes to what Hegseth is now reported to have done.
I guess the next question, given the number of people who have left the Department of Defense, either who've been removed or who have left of their own volition, can you describe as you're hearing it, the Defense Secretary's relationship with staff at the Pentagon?
In a word, toxic, I suppose, the people that we've spoken to. We can also report, and Secretary Hegseth confirmed it this morning, that his own chief of staff, Joe Casper, is heading to another job at the Pentagon. So he's been dismissed. And honestly, Vlad, it's like 10 little Indians here, right? We have the sort of front house office of this OSD that we have spokespeople that we usually get briefings from a couple times a week, that we reach out to if we need to get some sort of editorial support in a story. They've kind of ceased to exist. His right-hand man is Sean Parnell. It's kind of close hold. They release a sort of situational sit rep every week on a Friday to give the public an idea, if not necessarily the journalists, an idea of what they have tried to accomplish. But in terms of us trying to get information, that has become more difficult. I just spoke to a senior official right out in the parking lot, a four-star general. I said, hey, look, what's new? He said, if I knew, I couldn't tell you. You know, everything is close hold here. I know the leak investigations are underway, as you and I have discussed already. They've prompted the idea of even having lie detector tests and polygraphs. It's worth noting that the three individuals who were dismissed last week had not undergone polygraphs. They made that point clear in their statement as well. So, you know, a lot of tension here. Whether or not the defense secretary's job is on the line is a matter of debate, but whether he and his department are under fire is not.
I look at war plans every single day. What was shared over Signal, then and now, however you characterize it, was informal, unclassified coordinations for media coordination and other things. That's what I've said from the beginning. At the beginning, it was left-wing reporters from The Atlantic who got a hold of it and then wanted to create a problem for the president. This is what it's all about, trying to get at President Trump and his agenda. Now, here at the Defense Department, because, Brian, I want this to be very clear. We take the classification of information very important. It's very significant to us that we safeguard it. And so when we had leaks, which we have had here, we did a serious leak investigation. And through that leak investigation, unfortunately, we found some folks that we believe were not holding to the protocols that we hold dear here at the Defense Department. Through that investigation, they have been moved on, and that investigation continues.
CBS News Pentagon reporter Ellie Watson joins us now. Ellie, what do you make of Hegseth's explanation that we just heard there?
I'll take this one in two buckets. The first bucket, the existence of the chat itself. He says that it was used for coordination, but did not explain why that chat included both his wife, who is not a Defense Department employee, is a former Fox News producer, and his brother, who does have a position at the Defense Department, but as a liaison from the Department of Homeland Security. Why those two people were included about such sensitive details about strikes before the strikes even happened. He did not explain that. The second bucket I'll take is these disgruntled employees he's referring to that he blames leaks on. We do know that 3 officials were fired last week at the Pentagon for amid a leak probe. Hegseth today confirmed that they were fired for either leaking or being near someone who leaked. He said the investigation is ongoing, but that enough evidence was uncovered to dismiss them from their positions. He said as the investigation continues, they could be exonerated, or if enough evidence comes forward, they could have criminal charges referred to the Department of Justice. Regardless of that outcome, their departures now leave some holes in Hegseth's inner circle at the Pentagon.
Yeah, and even as all of that happens, we know there's also growing concerns about the Pentagon under Hegseth's leadership, even a call from Democrats for him to resign. So what can you tell us about that?
So Democrats called for Hegseth's resignation when the first Signal chat was revealed, and because of the sensitive details that he included in that chat. But then and now, President Trump seems to be behind Hegseth, supporting him. Hegseth's appearance on Fox News this morning, blaming reporters for the stories and blaming former employees, is his message that he is at the Pentagon for one reason only, and that's to carry out President Trump's agenda.
Okay. Ellie Watson, thank you so much for all that information. Appreciate your time today. And now to the White House and CBS News senior White House correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, thank you for joining us on 24/7. Is the president standing by his defense secretary despite all of these allegations?
He sure is, Mugo, in essence saying that he sent Hegseth over to the Pentagon. He's shaking things up. And clearly there are people at the Pentagon who don't like that. And so Hegseth is facing some resistance. But by all accounts here at the White House, at least publicly, they are standing by Hegseth.
When you dismiss people who you believe are leaking classified information, and again, the investigation is ongoing and that will take time, and when the evidence produced, it will go to DOJ, why would it surprise anybody, Brian, if those very same people keep leaking to the very same reporters whatever information they think they can have to try to sabotage the agenda of the president or the secretary? So once a leaker, always a leaker. Often a leaker. And so we looked for leakers because we take it very seriously. And we will do the investigation. Right. And if those people are exonerated, fantastic.
Okay, let's bring in CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. He's joining us now from the Pentagon. Charlie, we've heard his defense. Yesterday, he was blaming the media. Today, it's the leakers. Is this controversy likely to go away for Hegseth?
Liz, the short answer is no, at least not yet. You know, we're talking about it again today, and we will be talking about it in the days to come. As the defense secretary intimated there, he's shifting the focus not on the conversations that took place on Signal, now to conversations that took place. Certainly no denial, but putting blame on those alleged leakers. And there are growing calls, and we've heard them, certainly within the Democratic Party, that he should resign or be fired with this latest development that broke over the weekend, that he shared at least what most would consider sensitive, if not classified information with his wife, his brother, and his lawyer, and the criticism that those individuals would not have had security clearance about an ongoing military operation against the Houthis. And that information put pilots at risk. The Defense Secretary's ever-shrinking team is circling the wagons. His chief spokesman, Sean Parnell, posting on X, called it another story brought back from the dead, saying there was no classified information in any signal chat, no matter how many times they try to write the story. So former DOD spokesman John Elliott describes absolute chaos here at the Pentagon, full-blown meltdown of infighting, saying Hegseth should stand down.
What can you tell us about those Pentagon officials that he talked about that have been placed on administrative leave and this ongoing leak investigation? Is there any evidence to point to that?
They say there hasn't been any evidence that's been given to them, that's been provided to them. The three individuals are part of Hegseth's group, senior advisors. Dan Caldwell, who advised the defense secretary, sat in on foreign meetings, foreign visitors here, and other foreign trips. Another advisor, Darren Selnick, who also provided advice kind of in particular on DEI initiatives that we've discussed in the past in programs. And the last one is Colin Carroll, chief of staff to the deputy defense secretary. So, I mean, we're talking about Hegseth's inner circle, and it's a small inner circle. It's also worth pointing out that they were Hegseth approved, as it were. They weren't here before the defense secretary started here at the Pentagon. In fact, Caldwell, in particular, had worked with Hegseth before. Either one of them held a job here. So in a joint statement, they said, we haven't been giving any evidence for exactly why we're investigated, or if even there's a real investigation of leaks to begin with. So this is ongoing. As Secretary Hegseth said today, this investigation will continue about the alleged leakers, but the signal chat in itself and whether or not that put pilots' lives at risk is going to continue in the days and weeks to come.
Nancy, how would, from your reporting there at the White House, you assess the job security of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth?
Major, every single White House official we talk to says that Hegseth is safe not only in the short term but in the long term. They insist that he is doing a great job, that President Trump believes he's doing a great job. President Trump himself said that yesterday, and we've seen Hegseth out there today making the case for himself in a cable news interview. This is a White House, as you well know, that tends to rally around its own. And in this case, Pete Hegseth, despite the many controversies that he's been involved in, is one of their own. There is an ongoing question about these men who served him in very high-ranking capacities who have now been let go. He suggested that this investigation into whether they leaked information about him might be referred to the Justice Department. But then when the White House press secretary was asked about that today, she said she claimed not to know anything about that. So the fate of these three top aides, some who, as you pointed out, have been with Hegseth, have known him for years, is still very up in the air.
And is there any sense at the White House, Nancy, that this discussion of military plans, highly sensitive, whether they're classified or not, is a separate matter? Is conduct consistent with an effective defense secretary, or this turmoil within the senior ranks of the Pentagon is something they find consistent with a successful and effective defense secretary?
Major, anytime we've asked about that, they turn the question around on its head, and they say what they're really worried about is that these old stories are being peddled by people who have an axe to grind, who are not on board with Hegseth's plans to overhaul the military and simply want to hurt him. President Trump saying, for example, that he got rid of a lot of bad people, Hegseth that is, and that's why he has made these enemies. They simply are not engaging, Major, on the question of whether it was appropriate for Hegseth to share this sensitive information in not one, but now we know 2 signal chats.
The Secretary of Defense is doing a tremendous job, and he is bringing monumental change to the Pentagon. And there's a lot of people in this city who reject monumental change, and I think, frankly, that's why we've seen a smear campaign against the Secretary of Defense since the moment that President Trump announced his nomination before the United States Senate.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cortez joins us now. Nancy, how is the White House managing this fallout? Does it believe there are broader problems within the Pentagon?
Lindsay, they are closing ranks behind Secretary Hegseth. They say he is in no danger of losing his job. The president himself yesterday said that Hegseth is doing a great job and that he's making big changes at the Pentagon, and that when that happens, you are inevitably going to create some enemies. Never mind the fact that the people at the Pentagon who were relieved of their duties were members of Hegseth's inner circle, who had been close to him for years. So you would assume of anyone in that Pentagon, they would be the ones who were most bought into his vision and wanted to help him achieve it. But right now, the White House is making a much bigger deal about the fact that the signal chats were leaked than about the fact that the signal chats took place in the first place, where Hegseth appeared to share sensitive, if not classified, information with others.
Where do we stand, Nancy, in the investigations into these signal chats? And do we know whether this second chat, including his wife, brother, and personal attorney, are a part of that?
It's really unclear where the investigation goes from here. We've gotten indications that the investigation is closed at the Pentagon now that these individuals have been removed from their positions. But then Hegseth was doing a cable interview today, and he seemed to suggest that perhaps the Department of Justice might investigate. One of the men who is close to Hegseth, who lost his position, did an interview himself where he said that he wasn't involved in leaking anything, and feels that he was pushed out for other reasons, for policy reasons. So I don't think we've heard the end of this, but in terms of a formal investigation, it's really not clear right now, Lindsay, exactly what is going on.
We have to point out there are two very important differences between that first signal chat and the second. And by the way, as Nancy pointed out earlier, neither has been denied to have taken place. They're just downplaying the damage that's been done. First, as you said, it was initiated by Mike Waltz, right? That it inadvertently included a journalist, but that also included high-ranking security personnel. This second chat was initiated by the Secretary of Defense, Hegseth himself, using his personal phone, to individuals like his wife who would have no reason to know about military strikes against the Houthis, let alone strikes that were actually taking place in real time. Information, as we've reported out before, that if that was intercepted by adversaries, that might have put in danger the lives of U.S. fighter pilots. In that first chat, he shared that information with other security personnel. Not all of them had that sort of clearance. An investigation is underway for that as to whether that information should have been classified and whether it should have been used or delivered on an unsecured network like Signal. But that second chat calls into question his judgment in sharing highly sensitive information, including specific takeoff times, with people who clearly wouldn't have the kind of clearance to know that information. He insisted again, as you said, not classified, instead informal, unclassified coordinations.
You mentioned the investigation. Do we know whether this second chat is a part of that yet?
We don't know. However, as the Defense Secretary Hegseth pointed out today, and Nancy had pointed out earlier, that first investigation on leaks in general is ongoing, and that is an internal investigation. So whether another investigation has been has been started, it certainly hasn't been shared with us or announced yet.
How is the recent shakeups at the Department of Defense affecting its inner workings?
Yeah, you know, I've been walking around this building today, and you know, it's toxic. A lot of people are paranoid about speaking in general, and you know, former top spokesman John Elliott wrote a scathing opinion piece over the weekend. He described the situation here as total chaos, a full-blown meltdown. Now, he may have an axe to grind, and Hegseth said today, anybody who knows John knows why we let him go. But, you know, Hegseth dismissed 3 of his top and most loyal advisors, as Nancy pointed out. These are Hegseth picks, right? And he's also moved his own chief of staff, Joe Casper, to the other side of the building. So, yes, there's clear infighting in the inner circle. At the very least, that's been a distraction for individuals here. But I think we also have to point out that the way the organization is set up, there's a lot of importance on the COCOMs, or the combatant commands, like CENTCOM, for example, where you actually have a fighting war, right, a shooting war against the Houthis. So that is ongoing. We also have the threat of Iran, and CENTCOM is really armed to the teeth about that. So they generally run themselves. But yes, you know, this sort of chaos and the uncertainty of the direction coming from the DOD itself and the head offices here is clearly having an impact on morale.